Hello, everyone. My name is Alessandro Allegra. I'm a PhD candidate at University College London in the Department of Science, Technology and Society, and I'm presenting some of my doctoral research on scientific advice in EU policymaking, focusing on the division of expert advisory labor in biotech governance in the EU, looking at the case study of the regulation of cloned food. My interest is in how policy gets made in the EU, what role science plays in both making policy and legitimizing policy. So when we think about the EU, we're thinking of a supranational organization which represents a plurality of political values and is committed to respecting this plurality. So the motto of the EU is United in Diversity. At the same time, common decisions, common policy decisions are taken all the time by the EU over a wide range of technoscientific matters. The EU has been identified as a regulatory state, so the characteristic of EU policymaking is regulating, and regulating requires technical expertise. So the question emerges of how these common decisions are justified in the face of diverging values. And the approach of the EU is to justify such common decisions by depoliticizing them, basically. So presenting them as decisions which are based on science and appealing to scientific objectivity within the framework of risk management in order to legitimize this supranational body in taking decisions that affect the all of the EU citizens. Of course, this raises a number of questions, especially in the framework of post-normal science, about what happens to the value in this process, whose values are being represented, if any, and how does this process lead to legitimacy. This whole process requires a purification work to separate facts and values, some boundary work to establish a difference between these two different domains. And this work is often carried out in expert committees or scientific advisory committees, which is the focus of my research. So what's the role of expert advice in EU policymaking? The questions I'm interested in is what role do advisory committees play in boundary management in EU policymaking? And we can think of it at two levels. How's the boundary managed within the committees? So how they work internally, how the distinction between facts and values is operationalized within the work of advisory committees, and also what role these committees and the work they produce plays in upholding such boundary in the policy process, so in the broader EU policy process. In particular, I'm interested in the practices of how this policy work and advisory work is done. What do the people who are involved in producing science advice actually do? So a bit like the practical turn in STS, the laboratory studies, I'm interested in the advisory committee as a laboratory which produces policy relevant and policy legitimate knowledge. And my questions concern what is the role of procedures and bureaucrats in these processes. What values do these procedures and bureaucrats embed and verify in the work? And the analysis I'm proposing, it's anchored on an empirical case study which deals with the regulation of animal cloning for food purposes in the EU. This case study, there's a rationale for this case study. Part of it is because food is a constituent issue of the EU because of the common market. Historically, food trade, agriculture have been constituent components of EU policy, and also the evolution of EU legislation concerned to a large extent the trade of agricultural products and food products. Also, EU food policy is very clearly framed in scientific terms. In terms of risk governance, risk management, and risk assessment, the sort of like standard role of scientific expertise in policy is very much embedded in this. Also, cloning specifically emerges as an intrinsically European issue, as opposed to, for example, GMOs, which raised first to the political agenda in member states and then were elevated at the EU level. Cloning develops itself mostly at the EU level directly. Also, cloning is singled out by policy actors in several ways during its development. It shows clear ethical and societal concerns, and also shows a very interesting division of expert labor between different advisory committees. So by cloning here, we mean somatic cell nuclear transfer, and specifically applied to mammals, which are meant for the food chain, so either directly or indirectly. So the question is, was, if you clone a cow, for example, and you milk the clone, how should you regulate the milk products, or how should you regulate the offspring of such clone? The technology develops in the mid-90s. Dolly the sheep is the most famous example. And in the early 2000s, applications to food start becoming prominent on the policy agenda, mostly through developments in the US. And in the mid-2000s, the issue starts becoming pressing in the EU, partially because the technology is seen as approaching the market, partially because of market pressure, mostly from the US, and upcoming regulatory work carried out by the US FDA, which basically prompts EU policymakers to evaluate the issue so not to be caught unprepared. And also this happens within the context of the review of the 1997 EU Novel Food Regulation, which is the major piece of regulatory framework that's relevant to the governance of such food technologies. What happened in this case was something quite unusual, which was that the EU, or the European Commission, which is the policy manager, requested advice to two expert groups rather than just following the normal procedure of asking a risk assessment to the European Food Safety Authority. So the European Food Safety Authority was commissioned a risk assessment, a scientific opinion, looking at the safety of food derived from cloned animals. But at the same time, another committee, the European Group on Ethics in Science and New Technologies, also was commissioned an opinion on the topic of cloning for food purposes, looking at the ethical aspects of this technology. This is a quite interesting division of labor because one group has a clear remit to look at the science of food safety and to an extent animal health and environmental impact, while the other group has a much broader remit of looking at the ethics of science, including the moral, political, religious implications of such technology. So my research looks at the work of these two groups in comparison, both at the product of their work and the process through which this work is produced. Some differences emerge immediately. The EFSA advice is mostly framed around food from cloned animals as a product. So the product versus process distinction is a common one in, for example, debates about GMOs. And we can see these at play in this case where the EFSA advice concerns the safety of the products, while the EG advice concerns the acceptability of the process of cloning. While the EFSA work looks at the safety and tries to establish this safety, the EG work takes safety as the starting point without really entering into the merit of whether these foods are safe for human consumption, but rather saying, okay, well, assuming others establish this is safe, a number of questions still remain, which is quite interesting because shows some sort of deference of the ethics group towards the scientific groups in establishing matters of safety. So the EFSA opinion solidifies the safety by establishing that it's probably mostly safe, while the EG group, as I said, assumes the safety but raises welfare concerns. And the EG group raises concerns about the acceptability of such technology because of the welfare concerns that have been raised. Beyond the output, the process is also different. The two groups have different mandate and remit. They have different procedures. They have different expertise represented on the group. They use different evidence base and different ontology of what the word is made of, and they use different modes of reasoning. Now, all of this is relevant because, well, we can ask a number of questions about how the advice is commissioned, how it's produced, how it's been received. But all of this is relevant because once you look at the practices of how this advice is produced, you see some striking similarities. And in particular, you can observe the politics embedded in policy practices. The procedures that are used to produce such advice actually are not neutral, but channel certain normative views. And also the people that are involved in producing this advice, not just advisors, but especially the secretariats, play a very important role. And in a way, I would like to cast the secretariats as the invisible technicians of scientific advice. They often don't appear in the produced scientific opinions, but they play a key role. They exercise judgment continuously, separating matters of fact and matters of values based on what they imagine being the preferences of the policy clients and based on a very pragmatic goal of basically getting policy work done, which is a different priority from that of the advisors themselves. This is still work in progress. I'm still conducting this analysis, but I think some quotes here can really show how the role of secretariats is crucial in understanding the set of practices that have emerged at the level of nitty-gritty policy operations in order to constantly redraw this boundary between facts and values and allow some form of policy consensus to be reached despite the underlying political differences that still remain. So my initial conclusion is that these differences are negotiated in the advisory committees, and this is made possible especially by a community of science advice professionals who have developed practices to navigate the boundary between the epistemic and normative in a pluralistic policy environment such as that of the EU. And I'll leave it here for now and look forward to discuss it with the other panelists. Thank you.